here in Ojai, California, with my new friend Navin. Thank you for joining us,
Thank
Navin.
you, Michael. It's a pleasure to be here.
So I met, well, the reason I'm here actually is our mutual friend Serinda Swan said that there's a workshop you have to attend, and I didn't actually know anything about it. All I knew was that she went from. She said that she discovered her archetype
Hmm.
as a queen, and then within a few weeks she booked a show with The Rock called Ballers, and then she booked another show as the Queen on a Marvel television show on ABC, and I was like, wow, if you're achieving. My achieving nature was like, if you're achieving like that, I've got to participate. So it was the bait and switch because it
Hmm.
really wasn't about achievement. But let's start off with I'd love to learn a little bit more of. I know you started in aerospace engineering.
Hmm.
How did you come from aerospace engineering to the work we're about to share?
All right. It's a very interesting question, Michael. It spans quite a long history, especially since I just turned 44 today.
Yeah, happy birthday, by the way.
Thank you.
Yes, brother.
um, Actually, rather than I speak on how did I come from what I was doing as an aerospace engineer to what I'm doing now as a person who shares a teaching, a wisdom,
Mm,
um, as a disciple of an enlightened master. I rather speak about how I was then
mm,
as a person and how am I now. So it's interesting you mentioned about Serinda and about the archetype of being a queen. Um, what actually happened with Serinda is she didn't achieve anything.
mm,
All she did was she allowed herself to see herself as the nature of who she was. And then what happened was life decided to see her that way too. You see, essentially we operate from two different types of orientation. This is how I see me is how life allows me to see me, or life sees me the way I see me. And essentially these two orientations determine a person and their experience, um, their growth, and how they go about living their lives. Because one of the orientation in Serinda's case, all she did was she decided to see herself for herself, and she claimed it. And somehow claiming that, life decided to see her that way too.
mm,
Although it does sound very abstract, it does sound very, in some sense, spiritual, this is an essential fact of our lives. If I look back on my life, if I looked at the time when I was an aerospace engineer, it was how I was allowed to see me. Because based on the society I was growing up, they set a lot of conditions. They set conditions in which one is allowed to see oneself beautiful, respectful, successful. And one of the conditions was to have a job or to have a role that society placed an important view on.
mhm,
So I always make a joke, there's the four cardinal sins in the Asian society. You either be a doctor, engineer, lawyer, and accountant.
mhm.
And somehow if you make it to any four of this, now you've earned the right to see you as a respectful, successful human being.
Right.
And even though I was young, somehow deep inside of me, I had the intelligence to know this can't be it. My sight over me cannot be determined by the conditions placed on me. And so I awakened to that through my need to seek something more that did not have to do with the roles I took on to convince society to see me in a particular way.
Mm,
And this began my search for something deeper or something more. I wouldn't even call it a spiritual search because I went and I searched through every mainstream element, at least available at that time, that dealt with the subject of growth and transformation, um, and eventually, of course, moving into this field of spirituality, as they call it. And all I realized was, says a lot of what was out there was telling me about how I can, in some way or other, successfully meet or exceed the conditions placed by life or placed by the society on me.
mm,
None of it really dealt with me for me. What is my side over me? And this was what over the span of 20 years right now, since I've just turned 44, or I like to say 24 20 times. Over the 20 years, that seeking has been there. How do I come to the sight of me free of my reflection?
So when you say, I think that's a beautiful both statement and also evokes a question. So for those who are not familiar with what you mean by reflection, can you give context into reflected nature?
Right. So the simple way of looking at a reflected nature is when one identifies oneself with the role one plays in society. Now, being an aerospace engineer was a role that I took on. That role did live out a quality that was unique to me. That was one of seeking the depth, seeking possibilities, which aerospace engineering seemed to have reflected, or was a field at least that explored into these elements. Now, a lot of people explore aerospace engineering. I mean, we're using that as an example here. And they explore it in the hope that that role, or fulfilling that role, will fulfill them. So very quickly I saw, as much as people say, oh, you must love aviation, you must love aerospace, I usually answered them is, I love me. That's why I'm indulging in aerospace or aviation. I was not one of those, as you call it, plane geeks or space geeks, right? So in a strange, at that time, a strange sort of a way, I was not trying to forget me through that role. And what happens essentially is people, through their roles and through their seeking of a goal or a mission out there in life, forget themselves in that process. They get lost in the reflection. Then the reflection becomes the most important thing. That's why the consciousness of society, the word consciousness is what we have been made conscious of. And what we have been made conscious of will inevitably be the most important thing for us. And unfortunately, though, most often that importance is placed in the reflection, inevitably dismissing me again. So if we talk even about the field of spirituality, it's nothing about who, it's nothing about an experience. It's about seeing what is this entity called me about, and really looking for the sight of me just for me unreflected, free of those reflections, because the moment I go into the reflections and seek a sight of me, now I'm at the mercy of it. Now I will only see me as how the reflection allows me to see me.
So I love it, and I've had the good fortune of spending the last week with you, really delving deeply into this work. But for someone who may be watching or listening, we're all familiar with the various sort of, for lack of a better term, masks we wear, right? The ways in which we're conditioned by society. And oftentimes that's oriented around doing, right? So even my predisposition is to go to, my good friend is now doing big things.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm in,
Yeah.
because I want to do, I also identify with what I'm doing in the world, but I realize there's a deeper aspect to who I'm being beyond my doing. So I guess the question would be, if we recognize that the nature, or someone watching recognizes that the nature of what they're doing doesn't fulfill their, for lack of a better term, essential self, how does one come to the process of having their doing, or the outward expression of who they are in the world, be a reflection of their true beingness, their true nature?
It's a good question, Michael. But let's explore explore that question from the word doing. You see, whenever one undertakes a doing, if let's say I'm going to make coffee, that's a doing. In that action of making coffee, I'm producing something. All doing essentially is to produce something. And most often the doing that we undertake in the name of doing a job, fulfilling a role, doing to in some way make something happen, is in some way producing something that will be of value. And it will be of value that can be traded in society. Let's say someone says, oh, now I have to grow. So what is the doing that I can undertake here, right? So, or I want to see myself successful. Now, I will have to go out there and do a business and do it in a way that people will see it, or the business would be successful, and I would be able to get a recognition. Essentially, that doing is to create some value in which that value can be reflected onto me as my value. So every doing inevitably exposes the doer. And now, when you speak about the fact of the being is this doer. Has this doer seen his value for himself? Has this doer seen that it is the most important thing there is? Because then the doing would be an expression of that worth or that importance one holds for oneself. So I could have gone and do loads of aerospace engineering all my life, won the best awards for the best aerospace engineering, made the greatest discoveries. In that whole doing, how was this doer? What happened to this doer? Was it just a seeking of producing some value in which this doer could identify itself with? Which again comes from the reflection. Again comes from those who shall recognize me for it. Again comes from those who have successfully exploited that value that I did, that I offered. So whenever somebody questions now the significance of being, right? I'm saying everything starts, stops, and ends with me, which means I am the greatest force known to me, not necessarily even in reflection. One can be a slave and come to this understanding, in the world at least. One can be a servant in the world and yet live this state for themselves.
Like a Viktor Frankl.
Like a Viktor Frankl, exactly. He came to that state for himself and he saw the enormous power. And that power was not over the reflection being powerless in the giving that recognition of power. That power was a being for itself. And what this power is here to live out becomes then the next evolution for that reflection. So essentially, life depends on us. It depends on us being able to recognize the power of our being. What this being is here to see and evolve, and in that evolution, in its participation with the world, what is the next evolution for the world takes place. The Hindus used to use this word yogam, and yogam is a beautiful word to indicate that union of this entity called me and what is alive as me in participation with life. How am I here to happen to life? The effect of that is yogam, which means the next evolution for the other, based on simply me being me and acknowledging and honoring that which is alive as me. For that, though, one must come to see the fallacy of seeing oneself through the reflection, of being at mercy, where the sight over me is at the mercy of what life allows me to see me. Most people are trapped through a relationship, through a job, through their societal conditions that surround them. They are defined and their sight over them is limited to that. This is the misery of man. He never sees his beauty, his essential worth, and what is the yogam that is here to live out. And everyone in some way or another seeks it, whether unconsciously or consciously, by going outward to the reflection and seeking the more of success, the more of achievement, the more of love, the more of recognition. There is an essential nature of us that recognizes that evolution that we are participating with. All that is needed is for a reorientation of that sight. Every human being is living it, recognizes it. Just a reorientation is needed. It's as simple as that. It's from life happening to me happening to life.
So if I'm not familiar with the work, I mean, that sounds amazing. The question I think would be, well, how do I reorient? How do I reorient from life happening to me happening to life?
Okay, good question. The simplest way we can enter into this without getting into the study of it, right? Is when I sit back and I simply be silent and I ask this question to me. What is the next step of me? Most often we have asked this question, but we've always asked this question in regards to the next step of life. What is the next step in my life? Now, if I'm an aerospace engineer, maybe in future, my next step would be that I'll be a CEO of an airline, or that I would own an airline. It may be I'm an aerospace engineer. The next step would be that I own my own company. Our next steps, the next steps we seek in life is most often in the reflection. And again, as we seek that in reflection, we are hoping, at least in the doing, to come to that next step outwardly in the reflection. I would be able to see me in my next step. However, if one sits with this question for oneself, what is the next step of me? One is, in a very subtle way, confessing, I am not done yet. This entity, this identity, this definition of Navin as he is still a process. Which means one embraces that every moment is a moment for me to transform and evolve. And the word transform is beautiful. It's not a motivational word. It means to take what is there and see what is the next within it. It's not change. It's not denying a state. This is why asking that question allows one to be right with the fate of where they are and how they are and what they are, without making it wrong, without making it right, without exaggerating it or under-exaggerating it, just being with it as it is. What is the next step of me? We've asked this question with regards to humanity. What is the next step of humanity? And as long as we seek that salvation of that to that question in the reflection, nothing essentially will happen. No evolution will take place, because then the reflection will be the ways in which becomes the surrogate to how I shall see myself. I think that is the simplest way one can say, what is the next step of me? What is that possibility that exists as me? Not in a motivational way, not in a way that I can be more for the reflection. So I can see the more of me. Am I living, allowing a space for something more of me to be seen for myself? Or am I living in a way that has no space for it, which means this is a conclusion, this is it. Now I must do to make in some way or other my life happen.
So you bring up, you used a word that I think it's important to draw a distinction around, because at least in the U.S., growing up here, you use the word fate, right? So we're very oriented towards self-determination, again, being predisposition towards doing. But can you clarify kind of what you mean by fate in that process? Because it seems that if you're ultimately working to discover your true nature, is that something that's predetermined before your birth, and therefore you're stuck to the confines of your fate? Or do you mean fate in a different way? In other words, like, how does that process of becoming work in the context of a notion of fate for those oriented towards self-determination?
Just so that no one gets confused in my accent, the fate we are talking about is F-A-T-E.
Yeah.
Okay. It's interesting you mentioned the word our inherent nature, or nature, you said, right? Fate is nature. Like if we look at a plant, like we see so many plants around us right now. When we look at that plant, we are looking at it for what it is, just as it is. Even the word plant is an imposition on it. If we were just to have to look at it without a knowledge about it, that's the fate of what we are looking at, which means what is essentially is there. And for most, the misunderstanding with regards to this word fate was conclusion. That's how it will always be. And because of that, most people have moved to not being with their fate and wishing they had another fate or hoping for another fate. So their attention have not been in regards to how am I meeting this fate of mine, which means my life as it is right now. So you can see a very subtle, there's a what do you call that, a hidden predisposition towards one's fate. And this hidden predisposition is rooted in some way feeling I should not be in this fate, or another fate is what I deserve. So one is never really with what is. One is either with how it should be or how it could have been, past or the future, which is essentially a mind imposition. If one could just say, like, there was a beautiful story, they say, somewhere in Japan, they used to, people who used to have a lot of problems dealing with their fate. And they used to go to this monastery over there. And the whole exercise was the whole day, um, they would eat, they would do the prayers, and then in the mornings they would go out to this. There was a Japanese garden, right? And they would ask everyone to go in front of there were many trees with flowers, go in front of a flower and sit there. And they would do that for almost 5 to 6 hours during the day for at least 6 months. And after 6 months, they would leave the place. And many have reported to say everything changed, everything shifted with regards to them and their life. Things started getting in order. It's a beautiful exercise in that. Because in them coming and sitting in front of a flower, initially the whole word flower, beautiful, nice, look, I wish I had this in my garden. All these thoughts used to come out. But after day in, day out, they started sitting with it. All they could do was to be with that fate of what was in front of them. There was no name to it. There was no judgment to it. Everything fell away. And somehow just being with that, they were allowed to be with the fate of who they were, which means the nature of them, what was alive as them. And when they went back to life, somehow or other, that sight of them accepting them and their nature and what is possible as them was able to meet their life as it is too. At least this is my speculation of what happened, because it was a simple exercise. There was no magic element in that.
I love that. There's something you said that really resonates with me, which is that notion of what is alive in you.
Yeah.
So how do people come to know what is alive in you? You know, I mean, there's so many different people are hungry to know that, right? Is it meditation? Is it going to this teacher? Is it so? How does one come to know truly? I mean, partly it's self-reflection, but what's your guidance or recommendation in terms of people coming to know the essence of what is alive in them that is their uniqueness?
Okay. There are many ways for a person to come to it. I mean, the whole study of meditation, the whole study of one turning inwards was about coming to this, to see what is this happening as me. But essentially, though, I can say there are two doors to it. The first door is to follow your suffering, to observe it. Because any sort of pain can only be felt when there is something there happening here and something happening there. In that reaction of these two elements is pain. So the pain can be seen as a problem in which I need to eliminate or relieve, which is another way of forgetting what is happening here. Or it can be a door to see what is happening here. Like, let's say if someone goes and they walks past the street and they see a beggar on the road and he's homeless and he's cold, it's the dead of winter, and there is a deep pain in which they can, if they could simply be allowed to be with, without passing a judgment that was good, that was bad, one should do something about why is this world this way. Just being with that, they would be able to see something alive as them that felt that pain. It may have been one that saw the quality of justice, the quality of rightness. And that quality of rightness was what was happening there. One's life was supposed to hold this and live this out. So the elements of pain has been always looked at very wrongly. It has been looked at a problem in which one must relieve oneself from. And this is one way of them being wrong with the fate that is being there, because it's a quick problem-solving mode. Again, it brings in the element of doing now. But if one follows one's pain, you will see that in some way, through these triggers of pain in life, life was provoking me to claim or come to realize something that is alive as me, that is responding to this, that is reacting to this. The other door is to follow your bliss. This is a beautiful door too. Many, though, will not be orientated for it, because their life meaning has been derived out of pain and the seeking of a solution to the pain. But following one's bliss is the purest way, to see the bliss in life and see what is that about you that is celebrated in that. This is a beautiful meditation, to follow one's bliss. Because I see that which is alive as me, that wants to bubble, that wants to rise, that wants to give, that wants to pour. Then life becomes that giving action. Life becomes a giving phenomenon. And this is when things like yogam, one becomes a blessing. One participates in the next evolution of mankind. For real. in my participation of my evolution, the world participates, a part of the world participates with its evolution. That's why it's interesting we sit here in a land that an enlightened mystic called J. Krishnamurti once lived. And he said, a beautiful statement one, he said, "You are the rest of mankind." It's a beautiful statement, he captured it. He said, "As I am, the world is. If I choose to evolve and participate with my evolution, a part of the world evolves with it." Beautiful. It was about realizing the essence of relationship, that in some way we are connected. Even to say the word connected is dismissing the fact that we are all one. However, without sounding too as abstract, maybe in realizing that me participating with the next step of me is humanity participating with its next step. I think one has to come, every person has to come to that realization sooner or later, if not, that I'm not just the separated identity who is here to just survive and sustain oneself. That life depends on me. My awakening, my enlightenment, my flowering, my blossom, as much as I depend on that happening as me, life depends on it happening too. This is the beauty of union, to see that. And in many ways, all human beings seek it. They seek it in relationship, they seek it in finding their life meaning. But the misorientation was to make it all about oneself. To see that, what's the point of me transforming or participating with the next step of me? It's only me. And this was the dismissal of oneself. Dismissal of what was the most important thing there was. And because I dismissed me, I dismissed humanity of my flowering. Many could have been blessed by it. So essentially, as much as it's a selfish action for one to pay attention to what is happening here, but there is a selflessness in it too.
So much richness, I think, in what you just shared, and there's a couple different directions I'd want to go, but that notion of selfless and selfish. So if we break down some of what you shared, for example, you started by talking about pain, and as I interpret it, seeing the opportunity in the obstacle, which is easier said than done. You know, say someone listening who may be encountering depression and focused on the, you know, if you have a deep love and there's a breakup or someone you love passes away, it's easy to say, and maybe that's not exactly where you're going for, because I think what you're talking about is actually seeing some of the challenges we face actually as nature's way of guiding us towards our true essential nature. I guess the question I would be is, how does, if we are interdependent and yet also see ourselves as individual, how do we participate as, you know, as flawed human beings, often encountering things that evoke pain, but also experiencing things that obviously evoke bliss? How do we appropriately listen to the direction in which that's guiding us, right? So you use I'll use the analogy of the plant, right? So if our nature is let's say an oak tree, you know, and it's an acorn, and our life is about blossoming to become that oak tree. How do we give the most fertilized soil? How do we create the blissful conditions from which that can achieve its greatest realization?
It's a good question. I'll bring it down to one answer, in which I'll share from. You see, I'm a disciple. I live my disciplehood. I would like to make that statement. And I'm not a disciple to, as in a way of enslavement. It's a love affair that I'm participating with what is happening here, and that I've found a master or an enlightened mystic who can hold that for me, hold that sight over me, that I may never lose that in my reflection, right? And he once shared with me a beautiful statement. He said, essentially, now, when you happen, life happens, or life happens only when you happen, which means that which is happening as me here has to happen first. This is essentially the selfish nature that one must claim for oneself. only when this has happened, remember, this happening needs participation for it to mature, for it to participate in its evolution. And the beauty about having flaws is not just that one can wear one's humanness. It is also to indicate, I'm not done yet. I'm still a process. It's a beautiful, humbling realization to a human being to say, great, now I can participate with my evolution. The quest for perfection and having no flaws is one's arrogance in regards to one saying, I've made it, I'm done. And the very fact that we are still in life, if we are still taking that breath in as we live our lives, means we're not done. I look at flaws as, I'm glad I still get to participate as a disciple of life, a disciple to what is really important. It keeps me grounded. It keeps me humble to my fate. And many, many, many people have punished us or made our flaws wrong, which is in some way telling us that we have to pretend that we are done. This is as the Hindus used to use the word anava, the arrogance of the ego. And so this, if one sees that life happens only when I happen, then, oh my God, I am the most important thing. Because I know in my importance being acknowledged, claimed, and lived, another's importance will be birthed too. Another's importance, another coming to find their importance will be blessed too. That's the beauty of yogam, that one will not see this life is just about survival and preservation, that they will see there's something more to it too. That there must be something more.
It reminds me of a quote that I love, which is by Howard Thurman, where he says, don't ask what the world needs, ask what makes you come alive, and go do that, because what the world really needs is for people to come alive.
Beautiful.
So what you're saying essentially is, it's in the aliveness, it's in the fully coming to one's unique nature, flaws and all, that actually the world happens, like the commensurate rise, if you will, of that which is perceived to be outside also rises. Am I understanding correctly?
Essentially is, something is always happening as me. Whether it is my pain or my bliss, whether it's my confusion or my clarity, whether it's my question or my seeking of solution, something is always happening here. The fundamental inquiry for someone who is looking into this for real is to ask, how am I spending my life escaping what is happening here or rushing in to participate with what is happening here? Which means participating in every pain, every bliss, everything that is happening, every inquiry, every confusion, every clarity, every flaw, every beauty. I'm participating with this. This is what it means by I am the most important, which means I am never exiting that which is happening here. In the name of life, wanting to make life happen, many, many people have exited them. And this is the fundamental sin, because nothing in the reflection will ever be able to fulfill you if you have forgotten what is happening as you. And then our addiction to the reflection and maintaining it and preserving it and holding on to it in the name of power, fame, richness, abundance, recognition, becomes a disease, an illness. It is almost like a drug addict and a drug pusher. One can't survive without the other. So for one to first acknowledge, right, something is always happening as here, happening as me here. Always. It's always happening. Am I orientated to never escape it? The esoteric teachings have says, all you have to come to know is you. When you've known you, you've known all. It's beautiful, that statement. It's not just about the insistence of knowing every facet of me. It's about knowing that I am happening at all times and not escaping that. Whether I come to clarity or confusion, I'm in participation with that. This was the essence of meditation. They created many statues, people sitting in a posture, turning inwards. The posture was not important. It was this understanding that was important. Even in my living process, I am concerned with what is happening here. I'm paying attention to it. My sight is as much outwards, it's inwards too. This is when someone awakens to oneself and sees, oh my God, I am the most essential. the most important thing that could have happened to me.
Describe a bit more what you mean when you say selfishness, you know, because it seems, I think, for our conventional understanding of selfishness, it could be confusing, you know, because in essence you're saying I am the one that matters most, and yet in most people's realization that's an ego orientation, one, and two, as I hear you, you're saying be fully present to all those elements that are you and the experiences that come to you, whether they be painful, blissful, etc., as a listening to unfold further the real and true essential nature of you. However, most of us orient ourselves towards avoiding pain and pursuing pleasure. I mean, that is one would argue that biological predisposition, and many of us in today's society pursue entertainment for that pleasure, which also could be argued as a form of numbing, you know, in not being present to the pain.
Yeah.
I mean, I'd say frankly, you know, there are times where I'm in pain where I want to pursue a numbing, you know, I want to watch a movie, or I
Yes.
want to, you know, whatever that may be,
Yes.
have a glass of wine. So can you clarify a little bit more what you mean by selfishness in such a way that people can understand how to see themselves as that essential unfolding, but also how does one be with that as you describe it in today's society?
You see, first we have to look at what is the conventional understanding of selfishness. The conventional understanding of selfishness and the judgment placed on it as being bad was because people had lived making them matter. In order to make them matter to themselves, they had to make another not matter. So this was the selfishness that was judged as bad. That is not the selfishness we are talking about. We are talking about the inherent selfishness of oneself to oneself. And this can be very easily seen with one's biology. Our biology, our body is inherently selfish to itself. It's not concerned about another. The only time it's concerned about another is when it has this desire to mate. And that's the only time. Otherwise, it's inherently selfish. So, the psychology, though, has been in a way set by certain conditions imposed on it, that in some way I have to look at this biology as not being selfish. One has to be selfless. However, just as if you are here to me, you have to be selfish to your desire to learn, to explore the subject of what does it mean for me to live my next step of me. In order for you to engage with me rightly, right? In order for me to engage with my selfishness, to share the wisdoms of the masters and the ancient teachings in regards to this knowledge, or that which I've lived for myself. So we are essentially two selfish beings here in meeting. Now, in that acknowledgement of what is happening here, as me living the excitement, the thrill, the aliveness of my search, my quest, or living my quest and you in the aliveness, in the curiosity, in the energized state of looking for what is the truth behind all this, something more can be born out of this, which many out there might be blessed with in regards to the question they are living. So it's very important that we are all inherently selfish, and to confess to that. Everyone is. Even if someone is being selfless out there, they are going to be selfless so they can feel something about themselves or participate with something that is happening within them. It may be love is happening within them, that there is an inexhaustible need to pour themselves. And somehow moving out and participating with life and happening to life, in order to express this, to exhaust this, one can then say, oh, what a selfless person. I say, no, what a selfish person. That's why he was able to act so selflessly. He was so grounded in him. So this whole selfish and selfless was a very superficial judgment passed on to each other, and it was another way of setting conditions in order for somebody to support a notion of themselves. So now I project myself as being selfless out there. Somebody will see me as selfless, so I would believe I'm selfless. Now that I believe I'm selfless, nothing's happening here. Yet so much is happening.
Yeah.
But it's interesting you brought out about how we use entertainment to escape what is happening here, right? Yes, we do. And but the question is not the fault of entertainment. The question is, how is it that I've been orientated to escape myself? That's the fundamental question. Because I watch movies too. I love Hollywood too. I like watching George Clooney. I like watching Scarlett Johansson, Penelope de Cruz, and movies produced by Floa. So I love watching all of this. However, I'm not using it to escape me. I am there when I'm watching it. Like whenever I remember I was telling a friend I watched Braveheart like about 7 times, I think. I've watched that movie, right? I am participating in what is happening here and watching in that movie. That warrior. Uncompromised,
Yeah.
living his stand.
Yeah.
So entertainment should have been a celebration of what was happening as us, not an escape from what was happening as us. And I think that would be the new entertainment. Like the work you're doing, Michael, will bless many. But remember, essentially it is selfish. You're participating with what you cannot escape as you. And that is your blessing for you. You will open to see what's the next step of you. In that, humanity gets to do so too. That is yogam.
Beautiful. So, to that point of yogam, if you were to give the definition, right? Many people know yoga. What exactly does yogam mean defined?
Yoga essentially means to be one with something, to be in union with something, right? Yogam is like there's a beautiful knowledge Dhyan Vimal shared called the Atma Rahasya. The Atma Rahasya deals with coming to see how this entity and life are essentially one. That life being dependent on this that is happening here to participate with it. So life is needed. It is the casket in which the wine matures. And this union, this understanding is the union that births the next evolution for man, the next evolution for the other, the next evolution for humanity. However, I need to be right by my fate, which means my life, which means being right with something is to be in union with it, which means I understand that which is done to you is essentially I'm allowing that to be done to me. When you hurt someone, remember, as much as you are hurting them, you are also saying it's okay for me to be hurt that way too, you know. This is the science of that. Now, if I'm being right with my life, I'm essentially saying I will be able to be right by me too. And this rightness is the union. Now life becomes my ally. If at all, life is me, living itself out as what is alive as me. Sounds poetic, but that's essentially what yogam is. That it will be a blessing. How can it not? If any blessings we have experienced or any blessings that we are enjoying and basking in regards to the world right now, it was the effect of someone living their yogam. Someone who decided to participate with what was alive as them, what was happening as them. And they spent their whole life as a testament to not escaping it. And so much humanity derived out of it. So much humanity could celebrate out of it. So remember, when we celebrate ourselves, right, we are celebrating that union, that rightness of us being with ourselves and being with our lives. That's why it's so beautiful to see a person who is absolutely right with where they are and doing what they're doing what they can do. There's a beauty in it. You know? That's why you see sometimes ambitious people who are complaining how things should be and all that. There's an ugliness to it too. The people who have accepted that. Sometimes you go to the poorer countries, you'll see that. Their fate is challenging. They are living meal to meal. But you see the happiness, the bliss on their face. That's actually the rightness of them with their fate. And they are blessed. They are blessed. They will be blessed so much. You seeing them, you are blessed. That's why we always say, look at how fortunate we are. Look at these people. Actually, we are saying, you know what? Look at how I have been wronged by my fate. Look at how right they are. Despite the conditions set onto them, they had the power to choose to be right with what was right in their life.
Yeah, it's interesting. It reminds me, when I was in Haiti, I met a man named Wilfred Massena, who was amazing, and he had lost his leg in the earthquake. And I was with him the day, because I went down to volunteer after the earthquake, and I was with him in the field hospital the day he got his prosthetic limb. Now, most people are, it's a confrontation. Now you realize I will never again have my own limb, part of my body. But Wilfred was amazing. It was like he was given. He wasn't focused on the loss of it. He was focused on the gift of having to be able to walk again, right? Even if it was on a piece of plastic. And literally within half an hour, he's breakdancing, he's doing handstands, and he actually wound up starting a soccer league for all the people who lost limbs for prosthesis. So I went down and literally he started a soccer league. He wound up traveling to the United States and training veterans who returned from the war in how to play soccer with prosthesis. So he actually, talk about being right with your fate. He actually saw the opportunity in the loss, and not only that, but created a whole different fate for people who were confronted with the same challenges. So I like what you're saying, because it evokes in me like, how do you see something, right? Whereas I would potentially see that as a challenge or a loss, he saw it as an opportunity, which is
and the beauty about it is, this is what I'm speculating, I haven't met him, but the beauty about it is, in him being right with the fate of how he was, right? The next step of him opened up. What was there? Now I've lost this, which means it could have been life's way of saying, you have been lost in the reflection of your capacity to do with your body. Now I've taken that away. Now come back to you and see what is happening as you here. And him participating with that was his next step of him, which became the yogam for so many. So many now in his presence will not be lost to the reflection of their capacity to do through their body. They'll be able to see it's actually this, what is alive is here. Let's say they say, nothing is impossible when you are there. At least in the spectrum of reality. When I am here, how can it be? Because I know I can grow, I can transform to meet it. So many people get defeated by life, by their reflection. Because in some way they have mildly accepted the notion, they are concluded. Nothing more can happen here. And to live life from that orientation, that I am here to transform and evolve, means every element of life becomes, as what you say, an opportunity for this to participate in its next evolution of itself.
I love that. One question I would have is, you mentioned in the Atman when we did the workshop, the story of like this 92-year-old man who biologically was extraordinarily sharp, and at least as I heard the story, and maybe you can share it, what I loved about it was you said that the key to his sharpness was that he was living in perpetual curiosity. Like he was traveling not as he had defined. He was not defined in his knowing.
That's it.
It was a forevermore a question. So I love that idea of living in curiosity. Obviously, there's research now about gratitude actually being totally equated to our happiness. What would you say are tenets? For me, it's gratitude. For me, it's curiosity. But what do you think are the tenets to someone living some of the tenets to living a fulfilled life, right? Because we're oriented often towards success as achievement. At least that's the conditioning. But everyone's actually looking for, whether you want to call it happiness, for fulfillment, for that sense of being satiated. And what you're hinting at, I think, is people being right by their fate. It's even if someone like a Wilfred, they've come to see the gift even in the challenges, which I would also argue would be a tenet of fulfillment. But what do you see for someone really yearning for that sense of a more fulfilled life? What would be ways in which they could participate in that inquiry, and or are there tenets you feel that are central to living a fulfilled life?
Some of the tenets maybe we've covered in this discussion, but one tenet that is very, very, I think is fundamental with regards to this is, when we speak about the subject of curiosities, ultimately my largest curiosity should be in regards to this entity called me. And I think when one lives that curiosity in regards to oneself, the insistence on knowing becomes, I would say, fluid. It is not fixed. What happened, what was beautiful about that 92-year-old man is he didn't insist on his knowing. Most often whenever we speak to the older people who have lived life and all that, they always say, "Oh, son, I've lived life. I know how it is," and all. What they're actually declaring is the insistence on knowing, and they had a very small life. Very small life, limited by the conditions imposed onto them and the sight that was derived out of that with regards to them, in which now they are imposing on the whole of life. Life is a huge phenomenon, so huge. Whenever one resides as in the curiosity of oneself now, I open the hugeness of me with regards to life. Otherwise, you will see life as how you are, not as how it is. So the insistence on knowing, in some way, the intelligence must be there to say, I let go of that. If I lived life as an exploration of how much I do not know or what I am not, then maybe some point of time I may participate with the evolution of who I am for real. Most often people are living life trying to preserve who they are and what they know, not what they are not and what they don't know.
Preserving the construct of their perceived
That's it.
box that they've been conditioned.
And that is essentially a predisposition of the brain to seek security. It's millions of years of evolution of the brain. It's lazy. It wants security. It wants the quick fix. That security is because of the fear of the insecurity of death, that all of us will end one day. This biology ends. That which is alive, is it though? That's the question.
That's the fundamental question.
That's the fundamental, and it's been pursued by so many philosophers. What is the meaning of life? What happens to the soul? What happens to this upon death? The atheists say nothing. The biology just dies and becomes food for the worms. Even that is an insistence on knowing. Until they die, will they know? That's just one of my quirks for the atheists out there.
Well, one of the things I'd like to honor you for, Nevin, being as that it's your birthday, and we had quite a fun celebration last night involving dancing and all these things, is I honor you for your relentless inquiry. At least you occur to me as someone who is living in the question and have committed yourself and your life to offering that question in the most profoundly possible way for others. So what I mean by that is to say, I think some people have a prescription, an orientation towards this is my gift and this is what I'm offering you. What I love about my experience of you and what I honor you for is that you live as a stand for other people's possibility. And I think that's something that's it's truly beautiful, because I think most people they have an agenda. No, it occurs to me that your agenda is really to most fully exist as a servant in the world to evoke the possibility for others, and in that finding yourself. I don't know if that's authentic to you, but that's
actually,
mine.
I mean, thank you for those words. It's beautiful, but what I'd like to say, since we talked about insistence of knowing, and you said I am living the question, I'm essentially living my disciplehood. And this is one of the most beautiful forms, or what one can do or participate in, is to live the disciple state. The disciple, for many people they have talked about, they looked at it as an enslavement, as a way, oh, now I'm a disciple, there's a master, and now I submit. Actually, that's the false understanding. A disciple is one who is participating in that inquiry of what I am not and what I don't know. So, as what you say, living the question. In some sense, living that question comes to unravel the truth as it comes. So it is always an exploration, a discovery. And what I'm going around doing is living my disciplehood and standing with the claim that the disciple is the only form in which one can live this purely. At least one of the forms. For me, at least, it was a nature. It was a truth. So to live my disciplehood and to carry the light of my master and the masters that have held this light of how important you are to you. What is this next evolution of yours? So many of them have walked this earth and blessed us with that inquiry. And this is something I recognize in you too, Michael. There's the disciple in you. And what a blessing that would be in you simply living out that nature for you. That's why I say this meeting is sacred. Two disciples walking their path.
Yes, it's been an honor, and I think that it will not be the last of our conversations.
I hope so too, Michael.
Yes, brother. So I honor you. I acknowledge you. You're traveling all the time to offer these workshops, these truths to people around the world. So I'd love to, in the show notes, I'll link up to the different offerings where you'll be. But I very much hope that we can have another conversation in the not too distant future.
I very much hope so too, Michael. It is a pleasure and a blessing to have met you. I hold you in my heart.
Likewise, brother. Happy birthday.
Thank you, man.
Yeah. All right. We got
this.
Yeah, that's right. That's right. That's our joke. That's Navin's move.